Trước khi bắt đầu, nếu bạn đang tìm kiếm sách để học IELTS hiệu quả, thì đây là những cuốn sách chúng mình khuyên dùng. Bạn hãy xem ở phần giỏ hàng trong kênh nhé.
Section 2. You will hear the director of a club giving a talk about an ancient game played on ice called curling.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the Montreal Curling Club. I hope you'll enjoy the introductory program we've prepared for you. I'll start with a brief introduction to the game itself and the equipment, so that you'll be able to enjoy it when you watch it later on. I'll then go on to say a little about the history of the sport and the club. So, first, let's take a look at the game of curling and the implements it uses. It's played on ice, and the object of the game is for two teams to push heavy stones across the ice towards a target. Now, there are 4 people in each of the 2 teams. The first is called the lead. The next is called the second. The next, surprise, surprise, is called the third. And the final player, who is absolutely key, functions as the captain, but is always called the skip. That's S-K-I-P. The area of play on the ice, whether it be on a rink or on a frozen lake or stream, is called the sheet. This long, thin area is 42.15 meters by only 4.25 meters. And unlike ice hockey ice, for example, it is constantly groomed by frequent shaving to keep it perfectly level. At either end of this are the 2 zones for the targets. Each one is known as a house. A little bit about the equipment we need. The stones are made from granite. Originally, these were held by your fingers in holes specially carved out in the top. But then it was decided to add a handle to get a better grip. The other distinctive implement is the brush, or broom. This is used for 2 purposes. To clean the ice, of course, but more crucially, to warm it. This melts the ice slightly and lessens the friction, so you get a smoother slide. Curling is not an expensive sport. You don't buy your own stones. In fact, it is illegal to play in a match with your own stones, but you can use your own brush. There are 2 main types, Scottish and Canadian. The former are normally made out of horsehair, and the latter, which are now more frequently used, are made of synthetic materials, and they don't leave as many threads on the ice. Now, apart from stones and brushes, the only other piece of equipment you would need as a beginner is a rubber sole on one of your shoes, depending on which shoe you lead from. The captain will often carry a stopwatch to gauge when the ice needs to be changed. All equipment and clothing can be bought in the club shop. A quick word about Montreal Curling Club. It's renowned, not only because it often wins championships, but because it was the first club for any sport in the whole of the North American continent. And although curling is not as well known as many other winter sports, we still boast a certain amount of influence in the National Sports Council. And what are the origins of the game? It's now well established that it started in Scotland in at least as early as the 16th century. Queen Victoria, on her frequent trips to Scotland, often played it, but wrote in her diary that it required exceptional strength to throw the stones. Her patronage attracted a great deal of interest in the game, especially amongst younger players, and this was enhanced further when she granted a royal title, to the Caledonian Curling Club, which had been set up in the early 19th century to create standard rules for the game. Curling has always had support in high places. In the 16th century, the Scottish Parliament actually banned golf and football as violent and unprofitable sports. They felt that local men should spend any free time practicing archery for self-defense against their enemies. But the less popular game of curling wasn't included in the ban. The art of throwing stones was thought to be just as useful as shooting arrows. But back to Canada. Here the game has flourished since the beginning of the 19th century, when Scottish soldiers posted there enjoyed playing it on the frozen lakes and rivers. Because of the difficulty in importing granite stones from Scotland, cast iron was used instead, obtained from melted down cannonballs, which had originally been brought over from Europe. Now Canada is regarded as the most successful curling nation in the world. Now, the game you're going to see.
Section 2. You will hear a radio broadcast about a new museum which specializes in vacuum cleaners.
A new museum has just opened dedicated to vacuum cleaners. Yes, that's right, vacuum cleaners, the machines powered by electricity that suck up the dust and dirt from the floor. The museum's opened in a town called Eastwood in central England. Until now, Eastwood used to be an industrial town where people used to be employed as coal miners. But then, a local resident called James Brown became frustrated with the nation's failure to recognize the importance of vacuum cleaners, and he decided to set up his own museum. James first fell in love with vacuum cleaners when he was only 4 years old. At the time, his mother was unwell, so he used to help her out by vacuuming the house, and it was to be the start of the lifelong love affair with this humble household appliance. However, it wasn't until James was 8 years old that he first acquired his own vacuum cleaner. After it had been thrown away on the streets, he took it home, cleaned it up, and plugged it in. Amazingly, it still worked. And that was the beginning of his collections. By the time he was in his teens, his collections had grown to 30. The collection continued to grow until it reached the final count of 126, which it stands at today. James is delighted to share his enthusiasm of vacuum cleaners with visitors. One of his favorite party tricks is to blindfold his eyes so he can't see and ask someone to switch on one of the machines. When I tested him out on 5 different machines, switching them on and pushing them across the floor, he had no problem telling me the manufacturer of each one, and he could even tell its age. Loading on now a common household appliance, it wasn't until 1950s that most people could afford to buy a vacuum cleaner, as before that they were very expensive. In today's money, you would have had to pay around 1/3 of the price for an average car, which is around 3 months' wages for most people. Like most modern appliances, the invention of a production line halved the price almost immediately. But James is not the only vacuum cleaner aficionado out there, and a few years ago, he made a special trip to the USA to the factory of his favorite, the Kirby vacuum cleaner. There is also an American website called Vacuum Land that's dedicated to vacuum cleaner collectors. This year, they're even holding a convention in Texas with competition, awards, and lectures on the subject. So James might want to pop back to the United States to meet some vacuum lovers. So, if you've been inspired and want to visit James's Vacuum Cleaner Museum, what days could you go to visit? Well, they're open all year round from 9:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. from Tuesdays to Saturdays, except Thursdays when they're open until 7 p.m., and Mondays when the museum is closed. The history of the vacuum cleaner is an interesting one. The first commercially available powered vacuum cleaner was invented in 1901 and was called the Puffing Billy. It was so large it had to be pulled by horses and parked outside the house where the cleaning was being done. It was initially driven by an oil engine, although it was later adapted to be powered by electricity, and it was used to clean the carpets and the palace of King Edward VII in London. One of the most famous electric vacuum cleaners is known as the Hoover. This was developed in the USA in 1908. It's often thought that it was created by a Mr. Hoover, but in fact it was created by a James Spangler, who worked as a cleaner in a department store. Mr. Hoover was a businessman who bought the idea and then developed and marketed it in the USA and other countries. The Electrolytes Model 5 was developed in 1925. Up until that time, vacuum cleaners had been heavy devices which were not easily bought from. This was a lighter model which laid on the floor and can be pulled along on 2 strips of metal, and this was an idea that was copied by many other manufacturers. Then there's the Electrolytes 30 or XXX, which was developed in 1937 in the USA, and is perhaps the most visually elegant vacuum cleaner of all, with its sleek lines inspired by the Art Deco architecture popular in the 1930s. The most prized model in James's museum is the Kirby model, which is actually gold-plated. Kirby made Peace's trophy, but they also manufacture vacuum cleaners for everyday use, as sold only by salesmen who demonstrated them only in the customer's home. But even the everyday model might eventually become collector's items. Now, if you want to visit the museum,
Section 2.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll give you a bit of background to the museum and then tell you about some of the galleries. You probably won't have time to see everything today, so what I recommend you do is go to the Egyptian room first, because it's everyone's favourite place and it gets very crowded with the school parties later in the day. Oh, and I should mention that the photography gallery is undergoing refurbishment at the moment, so while that's definitely worth seeing, it'll have to wait for another time. Now, the actual museum building itself is quite interesting. It was designed by a local architect called William Craven in the 19th century, at a time when the city was developing rapidly, with new factories to cope with the expansion of the textile industry. The museum's built in a very similar style to the railway station, which was constructed at around the same time. That was designed by another architect, but William Craven did also provide the plans for the town hall, which was built just a few years later. Construction of the museum began in 1888 with a large team of carpenters, stonemasons, and builders. Then, in recent years, it's been extensively refurbished. The lovely big windows have been retained to let the daylight flood in, but the award-winning part of the project was the restoration of the area around the central hall. In particular, the beautiful wrought iron staircase, which was brought back to its former glory. Unfortunately, the museum's original tiled floor had to be replaced with new tiles of a similar design. It was a very expensive project, and since we don't charge admission fees, we had to find other ways of funding it. We did get some money from the Department of Culture at national level, but we had even more generous support from companies and industries here in the city who were our main benefactors. However, we do also depend on donations from people living in the area for the ongoing maintenance of the building. So, how will the museum mainly be spending its money in the next 5 years? We already work with schools and colleges, helping people get a better understanding of all the creative disciplines. We consider the most important part of our work the restoration of the valuable historical objects we are lucky enough to have in our possession, and this will continue to be where the most funding is allocated. Of course, it would be wonderful to purchase new objects for the museum, but we simply don't have the space at the moment. Well, we do hope you enjoy your day today, but if you would like to learn more about our exhibits on display here, I suggest you come to one of the Saturday morning lectures which are given every month by one of our team of experts. Of course, you can pick up leaflets about the exhibits in most of the galleries too, but you'll only get a basic introduction from those. We're also working to update our website so that it provides more background on the exhibits, but that's still at the planning stage. Okay, now let me just tell you a bit about what's on at the moment. Well, we're very well known for our collection of 18th century paintings, both oils and watercolours. Some of these are English landscapes and portraits, but we also have paintings by other European artists who were working during this period. If you're interested in art that's a bit nearer home, the Farnley collection is a set of drawings by Paul Farnley. He was born in Ireland, but he came to work here in the city in the early 20th century and then made it his home. He worked in a factory but spent his spare time drawing the buildings and urban landscape of the city, and his work has now been collected and displayed here. On a more practical note, we have a display of kitchen appliances which might interest you. These are the sorts of things you wouldn't normally expect to see in a museum. There's an electric potato peeler from the 1970s, which sold really well at the time, but no one's got one now. There are lots of other similar appliances, which must have seemed like great ideas at the time, but which never took off. You might also like to visit the Fashion Gallery. This is an exhibition which is running for the next few weeks only and shows men's and women's fashion from 1900 to 2000, including some of the famous designers of the time. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions, follow me over.
Welcome to our holiday special. Today I'll be talking about a new cycle route in this area called the Amston Way. It's well signposted so you can see exactly where to go. And it's an easy route with no steep hills. It's 35 kilometers long from Amston to Luyện and consists partly of cycle paths and partly roads. Let me outline the route briefly, starting at Amston Railway Station. The first part is a cycle path running eastwards, roughly parallel to the rail track. Almost immediately, the railway curves away and goes around the southern side of a little lake. But the cycle path takes the northern route around the lake. Keep your eyes open for the swans that nest there. The path then joins the road, and the next landmark is a group of massive rocks which tower over the countryside. You will see them to the east of the road just before the road goes under the railway. They are very impressive. Soon, you'll come to a fork in the road where you're going to leave the road and head off toward the river. But if you want to make a detour to Colleen Nature Reserve, go straight on instead of leaving the road here. Continuing along the cycle path, you'll reach the River Cleeve. The cycle path follows the river southwards. After a bit, you'll see the Ashington China Factory, which closed in 1962. When you get there, there's a bridge over the river, and you carry on with Langton Forest to the south and farmland to the north. The route ends at Langton Village, where you'll find a railway station. So you can either catch the train here or cycle back to Amston. One point to remember when you're cycling on the Amston Way is that you should keep your eyes open for sheep which occasionally stray onto the cycle path from adjoining fields. So be careful to avoid accidents. The path is well constructed, so it's not affected by wet or muddy conditions. There might be the odd car or tractor when you're cycling on roads, but most traffic has been diverted to the main road that bypasses the whole area. Now, a bit more about some of the places you'll see. The starting point, Amston Station, was quite busy in the early 20th century with services to several major cities, but it was closed in the 1950s. And actually, a small company was set up to turn it into a sort of railway museum, maintaining it in the style of the 1950s. And the station was ready for trains to start using it again earlier this year. It's only used by a few local trains, though. There's a visitor center at the station which has a small exhibition about the history of railway transport all over the world, and a facility for hiring bikes if you don't have one of your own. There's also a small shop just across the road from the station that sells refreshments. As I said, you can cycle to Langton and return to Amston by train, or the other way around, because you can take your cycle on the train. There's no need to book. There's plenty of room and no extra charge. However, the service is very limited, and the trains between these two places don't run on weekdays. If you want to see the River Elm, there's a footpath from Amston Station, and you can safely leave your bike in the car park there. Leave yourself plenty of time, though. Going down's easy, but the climb up is very steep, so the walk back up to the top can take quite a while. But it's worth the effort. The scenery is wonderful, and the footpath runs right next to the river, down to a waterfall. Finally, if you'd like to do some more cycling in the area, there are lots of other cycle paths. We'll be talking on the radio about them, and you'll be able to get full details in the Saturday edition of the local paper. The National Cycle Network also has some details on their website, although I have to say they don't have many local ones yet. But that may change. So we'll be telling you more about...
Part 2. You will hear a guide talking to a group of tourists who are going to spend a day on an island.
Well, morning everyone. Welcome to Palm Island. First, I'll run through the plan for the day. So, the idea is that in the morning you'll go for a walk. There are actually a number of different walks on the island, so I'll describe each one and then you can choose. So there's the boundary walk. This is one of the longer walks and it will appeal especially to people who love the coastline. And in fact, the tide is out today, so it'll be perfect for exploring the very old rock formations behind the beach. A good option is the loop track. Now, this is quite short, but don't be misled by that because it's very hilly and you need to be quite fit. The reward, though, is that you'll be able to see right down the length of the island and even across to the mainland. It'll be pretty as a picture on a fine day like today. There's the Pururi Walk, which follows one of the earliest trails that was built on the island. Unfortunately, the track's been damaged slightly by a storm, but it's still passable. The nice thing is, about halfway there's a table and chairs. They've recently been restored and painted, in fact, and it's a great place to eat your packed lunch and have a rest. You could also walk up to North Head. This is an inland walk. You'll hardly get a glimpse of the sea the whole way, but the attraction is you'll pass through a large area of very old native bush. The number of birds is amazing, including several rare species. You'll find some are quite tame, but please don't give them any food. Okay, well, after your walk, the bus will take you to the regional park where you can relax for a couple of hours before going home. Now, if you look at your maps of the regional park, I'll just describe a few things you can do. So the bus will drop you at the park entrance right at the bottom of the map. One interesting place is the bird colony. To get there from the park entrance, you go up the path to the lake. About halfway round the east side of the lake, you need to turn off and take the path all the way out to the coast. You'll find the colony there, overlooking a little island. Now, if you'd like a swim, remember that not all the beaches are really suitable in this wind. For the safest place, follow the path north from the park entrance, but before you get to the lake, turn right and go down there to the beach. Something that people find interesting is the old ship. It's more than 100 years old. To get there, just north of the park entrance, you take the path which heads towards Okiwi Bay. Then walk along the coast a little way before turning right and following that path over to Rocky Bay. You'll see the wharf, go past that, and the ship is just along there. A long walk, but one that's well worth it, is up to Stony Batter. You follow the path right around the lake to the far side and keep heading north. But if you reach the water tower, you've gone too far. Before that, you want to turn off to your left and take the path to the coast. Now, where else is there? Oh yes, the Settlers Monument. That's popular. So from the park entrance, take the first path on the left and follow it around behind Okiwi Bay. The monument is out at the end there on the headland. Finally, if all this exercise has made you thirsty, there's a kiosk where you can get hot and cold drinks. It's easy to find beside the lake, right on the water's edge. Well, now, if anyone has any questions, feel free.